Hey, micro friends. Dr. G here. So, I gotta shut the door. Great way to start the video. But I'm about to get on a roll here. So, we have our exam on Wednesday, opening up Wednesday anyway, but we gotta keep on marching forward. We're gonna get into some new stuff. We're gonna get into the next chapter, in chapter 6, which is about metabolism and how we extract energy from food. And this is a general kind of discussion because one of the cool things is that bacteria are, the first life forms on the planet. They sort of developed a way to break down macromolecules and extract energy from them. And then they share that with the rest of us. We actually use the same kinds of systems or similar systems that bacteria do. And so there's a lot you can think about in terms of diet, nutrition, the way the different food molecules are broken down, and how energy is transferred from food into living systems. We can actually interpret that from bacteria. So a good way to start this is to kind of come at this from a chart looking at basic principles. Okay? So let's think about this. Right? When we start thinking about energy transfer, that is, consuming food and turning it into some kind of energy that we can use, we can really need to get back to the very basic principles of thermodynamics. And this is a good place to start. So when we begin with the idea of thermodynamics, we have what are known as the two laws or principles of thermodynamics. The first law doesn't really pertain so much to what we're going to be talking about, but it's critical nonetheless, and that is the following. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. So what this means is you don't just pop energy out of nothing, and you also can't get rid of energy without doing something with it. It's going to have to become heat, probably. So we've got these constraints then that are presented by this. The more important rule, though, that we're going to be actually thinking about in metabolism is the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics states this, that all systems tend towards disorganization. This is the physicists would use the term entropy, is disorganization. Now, what this means is we can think about what is following along with the rules of thermodynamics and what are going to be going against the rules of thermodynamics. And when we say that a chemical reaction is thermodynamically favorable, that means it is a chemical reaction that is leading towards disorganization. So the universe, and following the second law of thermodynamics, is basically taking a very neat and tidy ordered apartment and turning it into a mess. We're going to be pulling the doors off the cabinets. We're going to be dropping wrappers all over the floor, dog hair everywhere, haven't dusted. That's what the universe is heading towards. So every time you are being more slovenly, more filthy, not cleaning up, you're contributing to the entropy of the universe. You're just going along with how things are going to be. Hey, not my fault. What this means is that systems tend to disorganize. In that we want to organize things, we have to put energy into it. And at a molecular level, it's like this. Stuff breaks apart in what we refer to as a spontaneous reaction. Now, we'll see that term is a bit misleading because it's not necessarily spontaneous, but it happens right away. But it is thermodynamically favorable. And then reactions in which we're putting things together, making new bonds, these are thermodynamically unfavorable. And because it's a law, you have to think about it this way, you can violate the law, but you got to pay. So you're going to have to put energy into a system to violate the second law. That brings us to our next set of definitions. This is sort of a chart that's really very useful, I think. And the chart, we can diagram it and set it up like this. Like so. We're going to label this chart. Well, let's see how this marker works. At the top is called metabolism. And these are just the chemical reactions in living systems. And we can have two ways of classifying metabolism. We got two forms of it, if you will. We have on the right side, or left side, I guess, we've got what we call anabolic metabolism. Can you see that? That says anabolic, regardless. All right, let me get my fat marker out. Anabolic metabolism and then on this side, the other side of the coin, we have what's called catabolic metabolism. So these are the two different forms of metabolism, anabolic and catabolic. And just so I have a convenient way to remember which one's which. Catabolic metabolism is breaking stuff down. So all those reactions that are involved in living systems in which we take complex molecules and break them down, i.e. digestion, breaking apart molecules to generate energy, that's a catabolic reaction. Anabolic reactions, we're not going to be talking about those so much, but anabolic reactions are those reactions that build things up, make all those macromolecules, make polymers and things. And so think of it this way, that's sort of a convenient way to remember it, is that people, athletes might take anabolic steroids to pump you up. You take anabolic steroids to kind of push yourself over to the building up stage so you can build big muscles. Nobody takes catabolic steroids. Hell, sleeping or not getting enough sleep, smoking, drinking, carousing, those are all catabolic, breaking stuff down. Anabolic is the building stuff up. Not just as a little point. When you hear about people, athletes taking steroids or roiding up, they're taking anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are not going to make you turn into the Hulk by taking them. What they're going to do is increase the rate at which you can build stuff. They're going to probably reduce inflammation to allow you to train harder. So you can take anabolic steroids, but if you don't put the exercise in, it ain't going to do you no good. Don't take anabolic steroids, okay? Thank you. Now, when we start thinking about metabolism, then, we've got these two different sides of the same coin, this living thing, this thing we call life. You are carrying out, at the same time, anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions, all right? So you have to have both of them going on at the same time. You have to break things down to get the energy to be able to build things up. Trying to point behind me. All right? So when we start thinking about these two different categories, we're going to be kind of ping-ponging back and forth. All right? So that's the way to think about this. Now, let's start with sort of, a definition, okay? And here's a good way to define anabolic versus catabolic. Anabolic metabolism, in a very simple definition, is taking simpler molecules, so it's going to be kind of relative, simpler molecules, and building up more complex molecules. So an example might be taking amino acids and coupling them together to form proteins, taking monosaccharides and coupling them together to form polysaccharides, right? So simpler molecules becoming more complex molecules. On the other side of this then, we've got catabolic metabolism, which is exactly the opposite. We're going to be breaking stuff down, we're going to be taking more complex molecules and breaking them down into simpler molecules. So an example here might be taking a carbohydrate polymer like flour or starch and breaking it down to generate carbon dioxide and water. You have an example, I bet you can think about this, of a catabolic reaction in which you take a piece of wood and you set it on fire. When you combust it completely, you generate a lot of energy and you generate carbon dioxide and water. So you generate these smaller, simpler molecules. Now, that's sort of a working definition that we're going to work with here, okay? Now, let's think about this in terms of the thermodynamics, the favorability of these molecules in terms of thermodynamics, whether they're following the second law or they're going against the second law. Anabolic systems, going from simpler molecules to more complex molecules, this is an increase in organization. And this is like, cleaning up your room, building stuff up and organizing stuff. And so we would say then this is not thermodynamically favorable. And a sub-point from this is, if it's not thermodynamically favorable, that means that these are reactions that we say energy is, or how about this? Let's say a net overall, that is, energy input is required. So in order to get an anabolic reaction to go, because it's not thermodynamically favorable, we're going to have to put energy into the system. Now, the exact opposite is said over here. So catabolic reactions in which we're taking more complex molecules and breaking them down to simpler molecules, this is going along with the second law of thermodynamics, it's favorable. And so consequently, we can say this guy is thermodynamically favorable and because it's thermodynamically favorable, that means that it is going to be releasing energy. So it is going to have a net, a net release of energy. Now, this can be in the form of heat, it can be in the form of moving stuff, it can be all kinds of different things. For living systems, we'll see how it works. Now, one final point about these things is that we can kind of define the chemical reactions in this following way. And this is not completely 100%, but it's a pretty good way to think about this. Anabolic reactions tend to be what we call reduction reactions. And catabolic reactions tend to be what we call oxidation reactions. Now, if you've had chemistry, you may remember these terms. If you haven't had chemistry, let me define these terms to you because it's actually really important. And it is summarized in the following sort of mnemonic that I like. And that is this. Oxidation is loss of electrons. Reduction is gain of electrons. And the mnemonic for this, of course, is the following. Oil rig. Oxidation is loss. Reduction is gain. Never forget that. Now, another mnemonic that is sometimes used is loss of electrons is oxidation, Leo. Gain of electrons is reduction. So it's Leo the lion says gur, but that's not how you spell gur, so I don't do that one. Oil rig is my favorite. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. That's a critical point. Now, another way of thinking about this is when we're building molecules up, we're making bonds, we're making covalent bonds, and the covalent bonds are going to require electrons. And so we have to add electrons to the system in order to build these big molecules up. We're going to be carrying out reduction reactions. When we're breaking things down, we're going to be splitting guys apart, and we're going to be oxidizing molecules, pulling electrons out. Now, when we start getting into the metabolism game, one of the things to remember is these electrons, they can't just be floating around in the air. They're going to have to be somewhere and have to go somewhere. So whenever somebody gets oxidized, somebody else actually has to get reduced. And if somebody's going to get reduced, that electron's going to get pulled away, someone's going to get oxidized. A really good way of thinking about oxidation reduction reactions is to think about fire. Fire is really nothing more than rapid oxidation. And when you have fire, you've got fuel, and you have to have oxygen or some kind of oxidizer. Just for the sake of our fireplace at our house, we got oxygen in the atmosphere. The oxygen is picking up electrons from the wood. The wood is being oxidized, and the oxygen is being reduced. The wood is oxidized to carbon dioxide. The oxygen is being reduced to form water. And so you may or may not know this. When you're burning a log, you actually are generating water. And if you had like a piece of glass or metal that you could collect that water, you'd see that there's condensation going on up there. So as the smoke actually is moving up from the logs, it's got moisture in it, and it's going to condense in the chimney and make a mess, whatever. This is how we can begin thinking about oxidation and reduction. All right, so we've got then these basic sorts of tenets here of anabolic metabolism, not thermodynamically favorable, requires energy input, reduction reactions, and catabolic metabolism. It is thermodynamically favorable, an energy release, and these are oxidation reactions. So what this means is we basically have summarized all of life right here in this chart. You carry out catabolic reactions in order to carry out anabolic reactions. And can we say the other way? Yeah, I mean, you don't carry out anabolic reactions to break them down. You kind of are generating catabolic reactions in order to get energy to build yourself up. There's going to come a point where life is going to stop, and we start shifting more towards the catabolic type systems, and that's breaking stuff down. So I think a little bit like this, is that little babies represent a phenomenal resource of reduced material. They're phenomenally reduced. They have little stretchy skin, blah, 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 blah. They are unwrinkly. They're really just squishy little balls there. As you get older, you become more and more oxidized, and more decrepit, and you begin to fall apart. So that's what we had to look forward to. When you're probably between 18 and 25, you're at the very peak of your level of reduction that you're ever going to be. You are as strong and as fit as you're ever going to be. And after that, it is a slow decline into decrepitude. Sorry. Now, taking antioxidants is an interesting thing to do because these help to maintain your level of reduction, because you kind of want to stay shifted over to this anabolic side. Theoretically, it would work, but you can take supplemental antioxidants. It doesn't work all that well over your long period of life. But for like foodstuffs, foods will often contain antioxidants to keep stuff from oxidizing, keep it fresh. So things that are further reduced, we think of as being fresh. Things that are oxidized, we think of them as being decrepit and nasty and stinky. Always better to be reduced rather than oxidized. But if you want to be reduced, someone else is going to have to get oxidized. If you want to grow up and get strong, you have to eat your vegetables. You have to eat material. You have to bring it in, break it apart. And this is the exact same thing that we're doing and bacteria are doing. All life works this way, this counterbalance between catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions. Now, before we get into some of these metabolic pathways, I'd like to introduce to you a cast of characters that we're going to be seeing all the time. And we're going to kind of start with the most sort of fundamental metabolic pathway, and that is the breakdown of glucose. As I said, we're not going to really talk too much about anabolic pathways. It's a little bit more complicated and a bit outside of our discussion, but the catabolic pathways is what we're going to be talking about. And we have some interesting things and interesting issues we have to think about. All right, so let's think about this. In terms of mechanisms and way things are going to work, if a chemical reaction is thermodynamically favorable, like a catabolic reaction, then that means that it is the way the universe is working. One way to think about this is if you wait around long enough, that's the way, that's the direction that things are going to go. So you have a fresh loaf of bread. Let it sit around for 2 weeks and see what happens. It starts to get moldy. It starts to get broken down. It starts to rot. That is the catabolic reactions. But you got to wait around a long time. Now that won't do for living systems. I got to have energy right now. I can't be waiting around. Now, another part of this has to do with the progress of chemical reactions that we actually mentioned a little bit in like chapter 2 or so. And it's this. If we think of an energy reaction, an energy diagram, and this is really, it's a lot easier to think about catabolic reactions, breaking stuff down, than it is anabolic. We'll touch on that in a moment. But let's think about catabolic reactions for now. We've got, on this axis, we have relative amounts of energy in the system. High and low. Now, let's put up here glucose. And let's put down here the products of breaking glucose down, and that's going to be carbon dioxide and water. All right, so we've got then this release of energy that comes out. So now this is the energy released. And literally, think about a piece of wood, you can imagine this. Glucose is simply the monomer by which we make up cellulose, wood pulp. So let's just imagine a bunch of glucose molecules, and now we're going to set them on fire. You take glucose polymer, wood, you set it on fire, and you generate lots of energy, carbon dioxide, and water. Now, here is the thing that we don't typically think about. If you have a piece of wood, a log, and you put it in the fireplace, and you say, all right, let's get some energy out because the second law of thermodynamics says you're going to break down and go. It takes a very long time. And that's because the molecules that make up the starch or the cellulose polymer are stable. And the stability of these guys keeps them from falling apart in what we would think of as spontaneously. Now we know this, we call this a spontaneous reaction, but this is a chemical thermodynamic term versus what we think of as spontaneous, happening off the spur of the moment. Spontaneous reactions, while we know the direction they're going to go, they still require a little bit of a push. And this is known as the energy of activation. So we got glucose. What we didn't draw here is the speed bump that we got to get over in order for the reaction to actually go forward. This speed bump is called the energy of activation. Now, the energy of activation is overcome by a match. All right, so matches burn about 700 degrees or so. As I said, if you take a piece of wood, paper, put it in your oven at 450, that's enough temperature to get over this hump. And this system is going to work in terms of the way we think it should, in that you can have a great big bonfire and you strike a little match, tiny spark, and whoosh, it goes up and you get all this energy coming out. So it definitely works in terms of the energy you put in versus the energy you get out. You get a lot more energy out. So that's not a problem. But we do have this activation energy that we have to overcome. Now, some molecules have a very low energy of activation. And another way of thinking about this is they're very delicate molecules. They tend to break apart. We've got a variety of chemicals in the lab that we have to keep in the minus 70 freezer because they are so delicate. If you leave them out, they fall apart fairly quickly. So it's kind of like their sell-by date. The faster it breaks apart, that is, the quicker its sell-by date hits, the lower the energy of activation is. Now, other molecules tend to be phenomenally stable. We build stuff out of those molecules, like wood and steel. They don't break apart very fast. They will break apart, but not real fast. They require a higher energy of activation in order to get them to go into this reaction. So the key point is we have this energy of activation hump we have to get over that is inherent in different molecules. Here's a problem. When I have a molecule of glucose, I know theoretically that if I let it sit for several thousand years, it will break apart into carbon dioxide and water, and it will give up the energy. But of course, I got to have the energy right now. I can't be waiting around thousands of years. I got to have it happening right now. So the answer is you put the energy of activation spark into it, that match. That would work, except, remember, I'm a fairly delicate creature, so all our living systems are. I can't handle temperatures really much above boiling. And in fact, my proteins can't handle temperatures much above body temperature, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So what am I to do? If I need to have a spark that is 450 degrees, I can't generate that kind of heat. I can't even expose myself to that kind of heat because the biomolecules within me will denature. What we need to do is lower the energy of activation. And fortunately, we have a system that does this. That is the idea of a catalyst. A catalyst is a chemical term for something, a molecule, that lowers the energy of activation of a reaction. So it lowers the energy of activation. And it allows a reaction to go at a much faster rate. The reaction now can occur faster. It can also occur at a lower temperature. And so we can essentially think about applying a catalyst and break down wood at room temperature. Cold fire. Not necessarily going to be cold fire, but cold oxidation. All right? Now, it turns out that we have systems in living organisms that can carry this out, and they are known as enzymes. So enzymes are typically proteins, and that's why we can say generally enzymes are protein catalysts. That means that an enzyme can lower the energy of activation of a chemical reaction. An enzyme is a protein catalyst. Now, a way to think of this in a functional sort of graphic way is, let's imagine we've got you take your roommate's car and you go to the top of a hill. It's a really steep hill, and maybe like we have a parking lot that goes like this and then, man, straight down. So you take your roommate's car and you put one of those parking lot stopper concrete strips, about that high, concrete block. And you roll the car up to it, you got it in neutral, and your roommate's cool because you got this big concrete block there. That's the energy of activation that we have to overcome. Now, you sit there and you start going on the back of the guy's car. And your roommate's going, that's not so great, don't do that, man. And but he's not too worried because it's going to take a lot of energy. It is effectively the notion of raising the temperature up. You start pushing this thing enough, and all of a sudden, kaboom, kaboom, boom, oh, and it goes all the way down the hill. Sorry, blows up. But it takes a lot of pushing, a lot of energy. Now suppose you do this. What if you were to, rather than having a parking lot bumper made of concrete that's this high, you got a parking lot bumper that's about that high and it's made of soft rubber. Now you bring your roommate's car up to that, it stops, but now you get out, put it in neutral, and you go boom, 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 boom. That's what a catalyst is doing. It's lowering that parking lot bumper low enough that the energy that's in the system at body temperature can push this thing over. So catalysts allow chemical reactions to occur at much lower temperatures. And on that delightful point, we're going to stop here. I will be getting some stuff about the exams put out to you later today, and I will see you